The auction hammer slammed down at $178,000, and the room erupted. Nathan Mercer stood frozen under the spotlight, grease still embedded beneath his fingernails, watching wealthy collectors applaud the car he'd resurrected from absolute ruin. But in the back of the gilded auction hall, one woman wasn't clapping. Victoria Hale's face had gone completely white. 3 months ago, she'd sold him that rotting garage for $1,000, while her executives literally laughed out loud. She'd called it worthless junk. Now that junk had just made him a fortune. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey travels. The wind off Lake Michigan cut through downtown Detroit like a blade that morning, turning Nathan Mercer's breath into white clouds that hung in front of his face before disappearing into the gray January air. He stood with his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his mechanic's jacket, the same jacket he'd worn for 6 years, the one with the oil stain on the left sleeve that never quite washed out no matter what his sister tried. The fabric smelled like engine degreaser and cold sweat. Across from him, separated by maybe 15 feet of cracked asphalt and dead weeds poking through the concrete, stood Victoria Hale. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. 29 years old, sharp cheekbones, dark hair pulled back so tight it probably gave her headaches. Her coat probably cost more than Nathan's truck. Hell, her shoes probably cost more than his truck. She kept glancing at her phone, then at her watch, like this whole meeting was cutting into something more important. Behind her, 3 guys in suits huddled together, trying not to look cold. One of them kept snickering. "Mr. Mercer," Victoria said, her voice flat and professional in a way that made it clear she didn't really care about his answer. "I'm going to be direct with you. This property is a complete liability. The structure is compromised. The roof has multiple failures. There's probable asbestos, definitely lead paint, and the foundation has settling issues that would cost more to fix than the building is worth." Nathan didn't say anything. He just looked past her at the garage. It was a disaster. She wasn't wrong about that. The building sagged in the middle like a broken spine. Sheets of corrugated metal hung loose from the roof, clanging against each other whenever the wind picked up. Most of the windows were either broken or so filthy you couldn't see through them. Graffiti covered the lower half of the walls. Tags and spray-painted names from kids who'd been using the place as a hangout spot for probably a decade. The whole lot was maybe half an acre, tucked between an abandoned textile factory on one side and an empty field full of frozen mud and garbage on the other. The fence around the property had fallen down in so many places, it was basically decorative at this point. "The city's been on us about it for 2 years, Victoria continued. She wasn't even looking at the building anymore. She was looking at Nathan like he was wasting her time. "We need it gone. We're assembling parcels for a commercial development, and this is the last piece. Normally we'd just demolish it, but the environmental assessment came back complicated. Tearing it down would trigger remediation requirements that would delay everything." "So you want to sell it?" Nathan said. "I want it off our books." Victoria pulled out a folder from her bag and handed it to one of the suit guys, who walked it over to Nathan like he was delivering a subpoena. "We're prepared to offer you the entire property for $1,000. You sign an acknowledgement that you're purchasing it as is, no warranties, no representations. All environmental liability transfers to you. We file the deed, and it's your problem." The suit guy smirked when he handed Nathan the folder. Nathan caught it, saw the guy glance back at the others and shake his head slightly, like they were all in on some private joke. Nathan opened the folder. The contract was maybe 4 pages, dense legal text he'd have to read through carefully. But the property description matched. The price was typed right there, $1,000. "This is a serious offer?" Nathan asked. Victoria's expression didn't change. "Mr. Mercer, I don't make unserious offers. You have until 5 p.m. today to decide. After that, we're moving forward with demolition regardless of the costs. Can I look inside first?" For the first time, something flickered across Victoria's face. Surprise, maybe. Like the idea that someone would actually want to inspect this wreck before buying it hadn't occurred to her. "The structure isn't safe," she said. "I'll be careful." She checked her watch again, then nodded to one of the suits. "Marcus, get him the key. Marcus, the smirking one, walked over to a black Mercedes parked on the street and popped the trunk. He came back with a rusty padlock key hanging from a zip tie. He dropped it into Nathan's palm without making eye contact. "Good luck," Marcus said under his breath, barely hiding the laugh. "Try not to get tetanus." Victoria was already walking back toward the car. 5 p.m., Mr. Mercer. Sign the papers and wire the money, or we're done here." Nathan watched them drive away. The Mercedes kicked up a spray of dirty slush as it pulled onto the street, and then they were gone. The whole meeting had lasted maybe 7 minutes. He stood there alone in the cold, looking at the garage. The wind rattled something metal inside the building, a loose pipe maybe, or a sheet of roofing that had come free. It sounded hollow and empty. His phone buzzed. Text from his sister Amy. "Did you eat breakfast? Dylan's asking about you." Dylan. His son. 8 years old, probably sitting at Amy's kitchen table right now, eating cereal and watching cartoons before school. Nathan had left before sunrise because Victoria's assistant had called and said this was the only time she had available. He typed back, "Ate already. Tell him I'll pick him up after school. Pizza tonight." The truth was, he'd skipped breakfast. He'd skipped a lot of meals lately, but Dylan didn't need to know that. Nathan pocketed his phone and walked toward the garage. The padlock was frozen. He had to breathe on it and wiggle the key for almost a minute before it finally gave way with a grinding click. The chain clattered against the door as he pulled it free. The main door was one of those old roll-up types, the kind you'd see on a warehouse. It resisted when he tried to lift it, the metal screeching so loud a couple of crows exploded out of a nearby tree. Nathan put his back into it and heaved upward. The door rose about 4 feet, then jammed. Good enough. He ducked under and stepped inside. The smell hit him immediately. Damp concrete, rust, rotting wood, and something sharp and chemical that might have been old paint thinner. His eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness. Pale gray light filtered in through the broken windows and the gap under the door, throwing strange shadows across everything. The interior was massive. High ceilings, maybe 20 feet up, crisscrossed with exposed beams. The floor was stained concrete, cracked in places but mostly solid. Along the left wall, an old workbench ran the entire length, covered in tools so rusted they looked like they'd fused together. An ancient lift sat in the corner, hydraulic lines hanging loose like dead vines. And covering almost everything, old blue tarps. They were draped over shapes scattered throughout the space. Nathan counted 8 of them, maybe 9. Big shapes, rectangular, low to the ground. His pulse picked up. He walked over to the nearest tarp and grabbed a corner. The fabric was stiff with age and dust puffed into the air when he pulled. The tarp came away with a sound like tearing paper. Underneath was a car. Nathan froze. It was a Mustang. Late 60s, fastback body. Covered in dust so thick it looked gray, but underneath he could make out dark green paint. The chrome was pitted and dull, the tires completely flat and cracked, but the body was there. The lines. The shape. "Jesus," Nathan whispered. He moved to the next tarp, pulled it back. Another Mustang. This one red, or it had been red once. The paint was faded, almost pink in places, and there was surface rust along the wheel wells, but the frame looked solid. Next tarp, a Camaro. First generation, 1969 maybe. Yellow, sitting on blocks because someone had removed the wheels at some point. Next, another Camaro, this one darker, burgundy or black, hard to tell under the grime. Nathan's hands were shaking now, not from cold, from something else entirely. He moved faster, pulling tarps back one after another. A Chevelle, a Corvette, C3 body style. Another Mustang, this one white with a black racing stripe barely visible under the dirt. And in the very back corner, under a tarp that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, something that made Nathan's breath catch in his throat. A Pantera. De Tomaso Pantera. 1971 or 72 based on the body style. Italian. Rare as hell. Low and aggressive, the kind of car that looked fast even sitting still. The paint was almost completely gone in places, eaten away by moisture and time. The windshield had a crack running diagonally across it. The interior, what he could see through the dusty windows, looked like mice had nested in it for years. But it was there. It existed. In this forgotten garage that Victoria Hale and her executives had laughed about. Nathan pulled out his phone and started taking pictures. Every car from multiple angles. The VIN plates, where he could find them. The overall space, the workbench, the lift, the roof beams, checking for structural damage, for rot, for anything that would tell him if Victoria's assessment was accurate or just an excuse. The foundation looked good. Solid concrete, some cracks, but nothing catastrophic. The roof had problems, sure. There were water stains on the floor beneath a couple of obvious weak points, but the main beams were steel, and steel didn't rot. It would need work, real work. But it wasn't unsalvageable. Not even close. His phone buzzed again. Amy. You okay? You're being weird. He almost laughed. Weird. Yeah, you could say that. Nathan walked back outside into the daylight. The cold air felt sharp and clean after the stale darkness of the garage. He pulled the door back down, looped the chain through, clicked the padlock shut. Then he stood there for a long moment, just breathing, looking at the building. Victoria had offered him this property for $1,000 because she saw a problem, a liability. Something in the way of her real goal, which was assembling land for whatever commercial development she had planned. She'd looked at this place and seen obstacles, costs, delays, hassle. But Nathan had learned a long time ago that most people only see what's on the surface. His dad had taught him that. Frank Mercer, who'd run a small auto repair shop on the east side until lung cancer killed him when Nathan was 19. Frank used to say that half the skill in this business wasn't fixing what was broken. It was recognizing what was valuable before anyone else did. People throw away whole engines because they don't want to rebuild a carburetor, Frank had told him once, while they were elbow deep in a '68 Dodge Charger someone had abandoned at their shop. Lazy thinking. You put in the work, you find out what's really there. Nathan pulled out his phone and called his bank. A woman answered on the third ring, cheerful and professional. First Michigan Credit Union, this is Sandra. How can I help you? Hi, Sandra. This is Nathan Mercer. I need to check my account balance and set up a wire transfer. Sure thing, Mr. Mercer. Let me pull up your account. Can you verify your date of birth and the last four of your social? He gave her the information, then waited while she typed. Okay, you're showing a balance of $1,847.32 in checking. Would you like savings as well? No, that's fine. I need to wire $1,000 today. Can you walk me through that? There was a pause. That'll leave you with about $847, Mr. Mercer. Just want to make sure that's... It's fine, Nathan said, probably a little harder than he meant to. It's for a property purchase. I'll send you the wiring instructions once I have them. All right, I'll set it up on our end. Just email us the details and we'll process it this afternoon. He thanked her and hung up. Then he stared at his phone for a while, at the pictures he'd taken inside the garage. 8 cars, classic American muscle, plus 1 Italian exotic. All forgotten, all sitting there waiting for someone to see them. If even half of them were restorable, if the frames were solid, if the VINs were clear, if he could track down parts, he was looking at potential value that made $1,000 sound like pocket change. But potential wasn't the same as money in hand. He knew that. Potential meant risk. It meant work. It meant gambling everything on his ability to do something most people would say was impossible. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered it anyway. Mr. Mercer? A woman's voice, young, efficient. This is Rachel from Miss Hale's office. I'm calling to confirm whether you'll be moving forward with the purchase agreement. We need to know by 5 p.m., but Ms. Hale wanted me to check in and see if you had questions. Nathan looked back at the garage, at the sagging roofline and the graffiti and the broken windows. Yeah, he said. Tell her I'm buying it. I'll have the wire sent over in the next hour. There was a pause. He could almost hear the surprise in the silence. Oh, Rachel said. Okay, great. I'll send you the wiring instructions and the final contract via email. You'll need to sign and return by end of business today. I'll take care of it. Perfect. And Mr. Mercer, Ms. Hale asked me to remind you that all environmental liability transfers with the property, and I read the contract, Nathan said. It's fine. Send me the paperwork. He hung up before she could say anything else. For a moment, he just stood there in the cold, feeling the weight of what he'd just done. $847. That's what he'd have left in his checking account after this went through. His savings had maybe another $2,000, but that was supposed to be untouchable. Emergency money. Dylan money. The fund he'd been building since Sarah died, trying to make sure his kid would be okay if something happened to him. And he'd just agreed to buy a collapsing garage full of rusted-out cars with no guarantee any of it would ever be worth a damn thing. His phone buzzed. Email from Rachel with the wire instructions and a PDF of the final contract. He skimmed it on his phone screen. Same terms as this morning. As is, no warranties. Buyer assumes all risk and liability. There was a clause about indemnification that basically said if the building fell down on somebody's head, it was Nathan's problem, not Victoria's. He signed it with his finger on the phone screen and emailed it back. Then he called his sister. Amy picked up immediately. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. You never call in the middle of the day unless something's wrong. Is Dylan okay? Dylan's fine. I need to ask you something. He heard her moving around, probably stepping into another room where Dylan wouldn't hear. What? Can you keep him for another couple nights? Just until the weekend. I'll pick him up Saturday morning. Long silence. Then, Nathan, what did you do? I bought a property. You what? A building. It's a garage out on the East Industrial Corridor. I'm going to fix it up. With what money? I had enough. Nathan, you barely have enough to pay rent. What the hell are you talking about? He closed his eyes. This was the part he'd been dreading. Amy had been helping him with Dylan ever since Sarah's funeral 3 years ago. She'd let him crash on her couch when he couldn't make rent. She'd bought Dylan school clothes when Nathan's paychecks went to medical bills. She'd never made him feel small about it, but he felt small anyway. It's a good opportunity, he said quietly. I know it sounds crazy, but I looked at the place and it's solid. There's stuff there I can work with. I just need some time to figure it out. Amy sighed, long and tired. This is like the truck thing again, isn't it? When you bought that F-150, that wouldn't start? I got that truck running, sold it for 3 times what I paid. After 6 months and a blown transmission. Amy, please, I know what I'm doing. Another silence. He could hear Dylan laughing at something in the background, probably a cartoon. The sound made his chest ache. Fine, Amy said eventually. Dylan can stay here through the weekend. But Nathan, if this falls apart, if you lose money on this, you need to promise me you'll stop. No more projects, no more gambles. You'll get a regular job, something stable, and you'll focus on being a dad. Deal? Deal, Nathan said, even though the thought of giving up made him feel like he was drowning. And you're coming to dinner Friday night, both of you. I'm making pot roast, and you're going to tell me everything about this garage situation. Okay? I'm serious, Nathan. I love you, but you're scaring me. I know. I'm sorry. It's going to be okay. He hung up before she could argue more. The sun had climbed higher now, and the temperature had risen maybe 5 degrees. Still freezing, but less brutal. Nathan walked back to his truck, a beat-up 2005 Silverado with rust spots blooming on the wheel wells and a passenger door that only opened from the inside. He climbed in and sat there for a minute, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the garage through the windshield. His phone buzzed one more time. Email notification. The wire had gone through. The property was his. Nathan Mercer, single father, part-time mechanic, owner of 1 collapsing garage and 8 forgotten cars. He started the truck and drove home. That night, after the sun went down and the temperature dropped into the teens, Nathan came back to the garage alone. He parked his truck on the street with the headlights pointed at the building, then grabbed his toolbox and a battery-powered work light from the bed. The padlock came off easier this time. He'd hit it with some WD-40 earlier in the day. The roll-up door screeched open, and he ducked inside. The darkness was total. His work light carved out a small bubble of pale LED glow, throwing harsh shadows across the tarps and the concrete floor. He set the light on the workbench and turned it to face the middle of the room. Then he got to work. He started with the first Mustang, the dark green fastback, pulled the tarp completely off and folded it to the side. The dust was incredible. He had to tie a bandana around his nose and mouth just to breathe. Up close, the car looked even worse than he'd thought. The paint was completely oxidized, chalky to the touch. The chrome trim had pits deep enough to catch his fingernail. All four tires were flat and cracked, the rubber basically disintegrated. But when he opened the door, it took some force. The hinges were frozen, and looked inside, his heart rate kicked up again. The interior was trashed. Mice had definitely been living in here. The upholstery was torn and stained, the dash cracked, the steering wheel covered in some kind of greenish mold. But the VIN plate on the dash was intact. Nathan pulled out his phone and Googled the number. 1967 Mustang Fastback, S-code 390V8, 4-speed manual. He sat back on his heels, breathing hard through the bandana. S-code cars were worth money. Real money. If the engine block matched the VIN, if the frame was solid, if he could prove the car's provenance, he was looking at a potential restoration value well into the 5 figures. Maybe 6, if he did it right. He moved to the next car, the red Mustang, pulled the tarp, checked the VIN. 1965 Mustang Coupe, i6 engine, not as valuable as the Fastback, but still desirable. Classic first-generation body. Next car, the yellow Camaro. 1969, just like he'd guessed. SS package based on the trim, big block engine, sitting on blocks, but the frame rails looked straight when he crawled underneath with his light. He went through all of them like that, one by one, documenting everything, taking pictures, checking VINs, looking for rust, for frame damage, for anything that would tell him whether these cars were restorable or just scrap metal shaped like cars. By the time he got to the Pantera, it was past midnight. This was the one that scared him. Not scared, excited, terrified, both. The Pantera's tarp came off in pieces, the fabric literally rotting apart in his hands. Underneath, the car looked like something dragged out of a lake. The paint was almost completely gone. The rubber seals around the windows and doors had turned to black dust. When he opened the door, the hinge literally fell apart and the door sagged on one corner. But the body was there. Mid-engine layout, that gorgeous Italian wedge shape, pop-up headlights, wide rear haunches, the whole aggressive stance that made Panteras famous. Nathan pulled up the VIN information on his phone. 1971 De Tomaso Pantera, pre-L model, which meant early production. Rare, collectible. Values on these things were all over the place depending on condition, but even a rough example could go for 70 or 80,000. A proper restoration could hit 200 grand or more, if he could pull it off. And that was a big if. He sat down on the concrete floor next to the Pantera, back against the workbench, and just looked at all of it. 8 cars. Some of them savable with work. Some of them maybe too far gone. All of them representing more labor and money than he currently had. His phone buzzed. Text from Luke. "You still alive? Luke Brennan." They'd worked together at Morrison's Auto Repair until the place shut down 6 months ago. Luke was a welder, certified TIG and MIG, could make 2 pieces of metal become 1 piece like it was magic. He'd gotten a job at a fabrication shop after Morrison's closed, and Nathan had been picking up side work wherever he could find it. Nathan typed back, "Yeah. You busy tomorrow?" "Depends. You paying?" "Eventually." "That's what you said about the carburetor rebuild I paid you." 3 weeks later, Nathan smiled despite himself. "I need you to look at something. It's important." "Fine. Where?" Nathan sent him the garage address. "That's a shithole neighborhood." "What's there?" "You'll see." 9 a.m. "Seriously? What is this?" "Just trust me." Luke sent back a middle finger emoji, then, "Fine. 9 a.m. But you're buying breakfast." Nathan pocketed his phone and stood up. His back ached from crawling around under cars. His hands were filthy, black with old grease and rust. He was exhausted. But standing there in that freezing garage, surrounded by forgotten machines, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the fragile, desperate kind. Something harder, more solid. These cars existed. The building existed. The potential was real, tangible, sitting right here in front of him. Victoria Hale had sold him this property because she couldn't see past the surface damage. She'd looked at obstacles and decided they weren't worth overcoming. But Nathan's whole life had been about overcoming obstacles. Raising Dylan alone after Sarah's car accident. Working 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads. Figuring out how to be a father when he barely felt like an adult himself. He'd learned that valuable things rarely looked valuable at first glance. That the difference between junk and treasure was usually just somebody willing to do the work nobody else wanted to do. Nathan turned off his work light and headed for the door. Outside, the city was dark and quiet, just the distant hum of traffic on the interstate. He locked up the garage, climbed into his truck, and sat there for a minute with the engine running, heat slowly filling the cab. Tomorrow Luke would come see the cars. They'd make a plan. Figure out which ones to start with, what parts they'd need, how to tackle the restoration work on a budget that basically didn't exist. It was going to be brutal. He knew that. There would be setbacks, unexpected costs, moments where the whole thing felt impossible. But sitting there in the darkness, Nathan thought about his dad. About Frank Mercer rebuilding engines in a garage not much different from this one. Teaching a teenage Nathan that patience and precision could turn broken things into something beautiful. Lazy thinking, Frank used to say. That's what kills most projects. People see the work, and they quit before they start. Nathan put the truck in gear and drove home through the empty streets. He wasn't going to quit. Not before he started. Not ever. Luke showed up at 9:15 wearing a Carhartt jacket with burn holes in the sleeves and carrying 2 gas station coffees. He handed one to Nathan without a word, then stood there looking at the garage like it might collapse on him. "This is what you wanted to show me?" "Wait till you see inside," Nathan said. "Inside that?" Luke gestured at the building with his coffee cup. "Nathan, man, I've seen crack houses in better shape." "Just come look." Nathan unlocked the padlock and hauled the door up. It screeched even louder in the morning quiet, and Luke winced. "You oil that thing, and it won't sound like you're murdering a cat." "I'll add it to the list." They ducked inside. Nathan flicked on his work light, and the interior materialized out of the shadows. Luke stopped walking. His eyes went wide. "What the hell?" "Yeah," Nathan said. Luke moved toward the nearest car, the green Mustang Fastback, and just stared at it. Then he walked to the next one. And the next. He didn't say anything for a solid 2 minutes, just circled the space looking at each vehicle, occasionally crouching down to peer at something underneath or running his hand along a fender. Finally, he turned back to Nathan. "Where did these come from?" "They were here when I bought the place, came with the property." "You bought this property? When?" "Yesterday." Luke blinked. "Yesterday. You bought a condemned garage full of classic cars yesterday, and you're just now telling me." "I'm telling you now." "How much?" $1,000. Luke stared at him. Then he started laughing, this surprised bark of sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "You're messing with me." "I'm not." $1,000 for all of this? The woman selling it thought the building was worthless. She didn't know about the cars. "Didn't know." Luke looked around again, shaking his head. "Nathan, do you have any idea what you're sitting on here?" "Some idea. That's why I called you." Luke walked over to the Pantera, moving slower now, more careful. He crouched next to it and peered underneath, checking the frame rails. "This is a De Tomaso, Pre-L. You know what these go for?" "Ballpark. $100,000 minimum. More if you do it right." He stood up and pointed at the yellow Camaro. "That's a 69 SS, big block, 40,000 restored. Maybe more." He moved to the Fastback. "S-Code Mustang? Jesus, Nathan. 70,000 easy if the numbers match." "I checked the VINs. Most of them look legit." "Most of them?" Luke turned around, eyes bright. "How many are we talking total?" 8. Luke did some mental math, his lips moving slightly. Then he looked at Nathan with something between amazement and concern. If even half of these are restorable, you're looking at maybe 400,000 in potential value. Maybe more. Nathan felt his chest tighten. Hearing Luke say it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. That's if I can restore them. Right. If. Luke walked back to the workbench and set his coffee down. Which brings us to the actual problem. You got any money left after buying this place? Not much. How much is not much? 800 in checking, maybe $2,000 in savings. Luke winced. That's not enough to restore one car, let alone 8. I know. So what's your plan? Nathan had been thinking about this all night, lying awake in his apartment after leaving the garage. We start with one car, the most restorable one, something we can flip relatively fast for cash. Use that money to fund the next restoration. Bootstrap it, Luke said. Yeah, that could work. Luke rubbed his jaw, thinking. But it's going to take time and parts and tools you probably don't have. Plus this building, Nathan, the roof is leaking. You got electrical in here? Nathan flipped a wall switch. Nothing happened. That's what I thought, Luke said. So you need to get power running, fix the roof, probably upgrade the lighting, get actual heat for the winter, all before you can really work on anything. I can do most of that myself. Sure, but materials cost money. Wire, breakers, roofing sheets, insulation. You're talking thousands just to make this space functional. Nathan knew Luke was right. He'd been trying not to think about all the infrastructure problems, focusing instead on the cars themselves. But you couldn't restore a car in a building that was falling apart around you. What if we worked nights, Nathan said. You keep your day job. I'll pick up towing shifts or whatever I can find. We use every spare hour on the restoration. Cut costs everywhere we can. Luke looked at him for a long moment. You're serious about this? Dead serious. Why? The question caught Nathan off guard. What do you mean, why? I mean, why this? Why now? You've got a kid, Nathan. You're barely keeping your head above water as it is. This is a massive risk. If it doesn't work out, it'll work out. You don't know that. I know I'll make it work out. Nathan heard the edge in his voice and tried to soften it. Look, I get it. This sounds crazy. But Luke, when am I going to get another chance like this? These cars exist. They're real. Someone left them here and forgot about them, and now they're mine. I can't just walk away from that. Luke picked up his coffee and took a long sip, still watching Nathan over the rim of the cup. You know what your problem is? You see potential everywhere. That's good for finding projects, but it's bad for knowing when to quit. I'm not quitting. I didn't say you should. I'm just saying you need to go into this with your eyes open. This isn't like flipping a truck. This is years of work. Years, Nathan, and it might not pay off. I know. They stood there in silence for a minute, the morning light starting to filter through the dirty windows and cut strange angles across the dusty floor. Finally, Luke sighed. Which car are we starting with? Nathan felt something loosen in his chest. You're in? I'm thinking about it. Show me what you've got. They spent the next 2 hours going through each vehicle systematically. Nathan had brought a notebook, and he wrote down everything as they inspected the cars. Luke crawled underneath each one, checking frame rails for rust and damage. They popped hoods, when the hoods would open, and assessed the engines. They opened trunks and doors, checked VINs against door jamb stickers, looked for mismatched panels or obvious collision damage. The news was mixed. 2 of the cars were probably too far gone. The white Mustang with the black stripe had severe frame rust. Someone had clearly driven it through Michigan winters with road salt eating away at the metal. The Corvette's fiberglass body had cracks everywhere, and the frame underneath was bent, probably from an accident years ago. But the others had potential. The green fastback was rough but solid. The frame was straight, the engine was seized but rebuildable, and most of the body panels were salvageable under the oxidation. The yellow Camaro needed a lot of work, but sitting on blocks had actually protected it from some of the moisture damage. The red 65 Mustang Coupe was in decent shape for its age, and the Pantera, despite looking like it had been abandoned at the bottom of a swimming pool, had good bones. The frame was intact. The engine, though completely frozen, was the original Ford Cleveland 5.8, and the body, underneath all the deterioration, was straight. Fastback first, Luke said, closing his notebook. It's the most valuable, and it's in good enough shape that we could actually finish it without going bankrupt. Get it running, get it looking decent, flip it to a collector. Use that money to fund the Camaro and the Pantera. How long? Nathan asked. To restore the Fastback? Luke thought about it. Working nights and weekends? Assuming nothing goes catastrophically wrong? 6 months, maybe 8. That's a long time. That's fast for a full restoration. Most shops would take a year, year and a half, but they're not working on towing shift money and desperation. Nathan smiled despite himself. You calling me desperate? I'm calling you broke and ambitious. Different thing. They locked up the garage and stood outside in the cold. The building looked even worse in full daylight. The graffiti was more obvious, the structural damage more apparent. Nathan could see why Victoria had wanted it gone. You need a business license, Luke said. Can't legally operate a restoration shop without one. And insurance. You get hurt in there, or someone else gets hurt, you're personally liable unless you're properly covered. How much does that cost? Couple hundred for the license, maybe $500 a year for basic liability coverage. More if you want comprehensive. Nathan did the math in his head. Between the infrastructure repairs, the business setup costs, and parts for the first restoration, he was looking at easily $5,000 or $6,000. He had maybe $3,000 to his name. I'll figure it out, he said. Luke gave him a look. You keep saying that. Because I will. Nathan, I will, Luke. I don't know how yet, but I'll make it work. Luke shook his head, but he was smiling slightly. You're either the most stubborn person I know or the most delusional. Maybe both. Probably both. All right. I'll help you. But we do this smart, okay? No shortcuts that'll get us killed or sued. We fix the building first. Roof, electrical, heat, then we tackle the Fastback. One step at a time. Nathan stuck out his hand. Luke looked at it, then gripped it hard. One step at a time, Nathan agreed. Over the next 3 weeks, Nathan worked harder than he'd ever worked in his life. He picked up a towing contract with a company that ran night shifts, pulling in maybe $200 a week, hooking up broken-down cars and hauling them to impounds or repair shops. The hours were brutal, midnight to 6 a.m. most nights, but the money was consistent, and they didn't care if he looked exhausted. During the day when he wasn't sleeping or picking Dylan up from school, he worked on the garage. He started with the roof, bought cheap corrugated metal sheets from a salvage yard and hauled them to the site in his truck bed, 2 or 3 at a time. Luke came by on his lunch breaks when he could, and together they climbed up on the questionable roof structure and replaced the worst sections. It was dangerous work. The old metal was slippery with frost, and more than once Nathan's foot went through a rotted section and he had to catch himself on a beam. You fall off this thing and die. I'm not explaining it to your sister, Luke said, hauling Nathan back from a particularly close call. Noted. They worked in silence mostly, the cold making conversation difficult. When a section was done, they'd climb down and stand there shivering, looking up at their progress. Patch by patch, the roof became less of a disaster. Electrical was harder. Nathan didn't have an electrician's license, but he knew enough to be dangerous, which was exactly the problem. He pulled wire, installed a new breaker panel with a permit he probably shouldn't have been able to get, and ran basic lighting throughout the garage. It wasn't pretty, but when he finally flipped the main breaker and the overhead fluorescents flickered to life, the whole space transformed. The cars looked different in real light. Worse in some ways, you could see every flaw, every patch of rust, every cracked seal and missing piece, but also more real. More like actual vehicles instead of shapes under tarps. Dylan came to visit on a Saturday. Amy drove him over and she stood in the doorway looking around with an expression Nathan couldn't quite read. It's bigger than I thought, she said. Yeah. Still looks like a death trap. I fixed the roof. Most of it? Luke called from the back, where he was welding supports for the workbench. Sparks cascaded around him like orange rain. Dylan ran straight to the cars, eyes huge. Dad, are these yours? They are. All of them? All of them. Even the race car? He was pointing at the Pantera. That's not a race car, buddy. It's a Pantera, Italian sports car. It looks like a race car. Nathan smiled. Yeah, it kind of does.